If you've been setting yourself the same goal time after time, year upon year, with very little to show for it, it's probably not your fault. It's probably because the goal sucks. There are some goals that we just shouldn't set for ourselves. So in this video, we're going to look at the common types of goals to avoid, why we should aim to avoid them, and how we can go about picking better goals instead. When it comes to bad goals, the first category of these are the ones we feel we should be setting. These are usually the ones that are super common in the general populace of people. They're the goals that are seen as admirable. A lot of people will look favorably upon these kinds of goals. And we tell ourselves they're things we want to, but sometimes we don't really want them. We want to want them, we feel like we should want them, but in actuality, we don't really care. Or possibly, if you want a softer way to word it, we don't really mind if we're not working on them. And thus, we don't work on them. Rather than actually wanting to work on this thing and actually wanting to achieve that goal, we instead want to be seen as the kind of person who has that accomplishment, or who has achieved that thing. While we could get into a full side conversation about societal pressures and how they can influence our goals, essentially these are the types of goals that, unless there is a major external pressure, we're just not naturally going to tend towards working on them. Because really, they're not things that really matter to us. Or possibly, they're just not things that matter to us right now. One of the ways you can identify whether you've set one of these types of goals is ask yourself, if I were to tell nobody about the goals I was working on, would I actually set this one for myself? Sometimes we set a goal just because it sounds good saying that we're gonna work on that thing. People outside of ourselves will praise us for working on that thing, even if it's not necessarily something we actually want to work on. While we will get to talking about the types of goals to set in this category instead, the next category of bad goals are the ones that require sacrifices that we're not willing to pay. Oftentimes, this doesn't actually mean that the outcome is an issue, but the process that we foresee as being necessary to get there is the part that's problematic. For pretty much any goal, there are going to be a lot of different ways to work on them. But if you've been trying to go down a route that requires you to make major sacrifices that you don't want to pay to get to that end outcome, that route isn't going to be for you. It's going to feel harder than it realistically needs to be to get to the end outcome. It's going to feel really demotivating. It's going to feel like a giant slog. And so what's going to happen is that your mind will rebel against the entire idea of it, and you won't work on that goal. If the sacrifices you need to make or the trade-offs to work on the goal in that way are too big, you will avoid working on the goal, you won't make the progress you're hoping for, and you won't reach the end outcome. Whereas there could be other ways forward, other routes to get to the end outcome you want, that don't require those sacrifices. Maybe it's extending your timeline so things don't have to be done as fast. Maybe it's making sacrifices in other areas or other ways. But the next type of bad goal, one that we should hopefully avoid, are goals where we're just not willing to go through the dip. The dip is the point in the middle of working on any goal, especially a goal that's worth working on, where things just feel sucky, they feel like a slog. We start to wonder, is it really worth the effort I'm putting in here? Is the outcome actually going to be worth the effort I'm putting in? And so if you're setting a goal where the effort isn't worth the outcome, that is definitely not a type of goal that we're going to work on for very long. While it can sometimes be difficult to predict how much of a dip a goal will have, or how much effort we're going to need to put into that goal to get to the outcome we're hoping for, identifying sooner in the process rather than later as to whether the work towards that goal is going to be worthwhile can really save us some heartache in the long run. When it comes to goal getting, there's not a lot worse than feeling like we've wasted our time with something. And so if you're working on a goal where you foresee that the effort isn't actually going to be worth the outcome, that's a goal you should probably avoid. The next category is one that catches a lot of people out, and that is setting goals that aren't realistic. Now, there are a couple of different ways that a goal can be unrealistic. Maybe it's just too big for the amount of time we're giving to it. Maybe the deadline we've set for ourselves in terms of that goal doesn't really align with the amount of work that needs to be put in, or the amount of time that needs to be set aside to work on that thing. For instance, it's all good and well for me to say, oh yeah, I'm gonna go from being completely sedentary to running a double marathon in a span of 2 weeks, but honestly that's probably going to lead to a lot more injury than it is accomplishment. While getting me to a point of being able to run a double marathon is something I could do, the unrealistic element of this is setting a time restriction that doesn't align with how much work I would need to put in. Another way that we can set goals that are unrealistic are things that are just so outside our zone of control and outside of our current reality that the likelihood of them happening are slim to none. These type of goals I like to call wishes, and while they can be nice to daydream with, oftentimes if we try and actively work on those things, they can lead to more disappointment than they're worth. For pretty much any unrealistic goal we set though, there are a lot of negative feelings that get attached to these. For instance, if you're setting a goal with a time frame that's too short for the amount of work that goal requires, this is going to lead to a lot of overwhelm, possibly burnout if you really actively try and cram as much into that time frame as possible. And then if you get to a point where you realize, actually there is way too much to do and now I'm completely overwhelmed, this can lead to a feeling of helplessness because you don't feel like you have the skill set, the knowledge, or the general ability to get that work done. Whereas if you set a more realistic time frame for yourself, you may find that actually you can do the thing. While these 4 different types, the ones that we want to want or should want, the ones that have sacrifices that are too big and we don't want to pay them, the ones where the effort isn't worth the outcome, or the ones that are unrealistic, those are our bad goal types, the ones we should avoid. What type of goals should we go for? Or the ones that we could go for, and probably will find more success with them. The first one is focusing on things that you actually want rather than you want to want. Rather than picking goals because we should pick them or they sound good on paper or good when we share those goals with other people, focus instead on the things that genuinely excite you. You have an intrinsic motivation to work on them. Thinking about accomplishing that goal gets you fired up, and even if you weren't going to share your goals with anyone, you'd still want to work on this thing. What you can also think about in terms of this is tending towards goals that actually address a genuine pain point for yourself. There may be a certain area of your life where society says that you should work on that thing, but if it's not something that's causing you a lot of pain, stress, drama, then maybe it's not an area you want to set a goal in right now. And that's okay. Rather than setting yourself a goal in that area because there's some societal expectation to do so, focus on something you're more excited to work on instead. When looking for goals that align with your wants, we can consider, how do we spend our day to day? What do we naturally tend towards doing or get excited talking about? Or what kind of evidence do we have from our regular everyday lives and tendencies that highlight the stuff that's important to us and we might want to set goals towards? Oftentimes, even just looking for goals in these categories is going to lead to a lot more goal success. The next type of goal to consider is less about the outcome and more about the process. And this is picking goals where the process doesn't have any sacrifices that you wouldn't be willing to pay. A lot of goals are going to require some kind of sacrifice, some kind of trade-off, whether that's in terms of time, effort, energy, or money, but picking a route towards the end outcome you want that requires the least amount of those, or the least amount that are a little bit painful to pay, those are going to be the routes that are more likely to lead to success for you. As said, this one is more about the process for working on the goal rather than the end outcome, but most of the time, regardless of what goal outcome you're looking for, there are multiple paths that you could take to get there. We just need to find the path that requires the least amount of sacrifices or the least amount of really bad sacrifices for you. One of the ways you can think about this is the yes, but framework. So yes, I want this thing, but I'm not willing to do this thing. So for instance, yes, I want to buy my own house, but no, I don't want to have a really long mortgage that sits over my head for many, many years. That means that in terms of working on that goal, maybe you need to spend a little more time getting together your deposit. Maybe you need to look for housing in areas where the cost is a little lower. Here, we're not changing the end outcome of wanting to own your own house. We're just selecting a route that gets you there without the sacrifices you don't want to pay. Another way that we can pick goals though is by focusing on what we want our day-to-day to look like. Rather than dreaming up an ideal life that sounds really good on paper or looks really good in our mind, this is taking it to a more granular level. Here we can think about things like, when do we get up in the morning? What do we do with our morning routine? What job are we headed off to, or what are we going to be doing with the rest of our day? How do we spend our afternoons, our evenings? When do we get into bed? By getting clear about the vision that we have for day-to-day life, we can then select goals that help take us in the direction of that ideal day-to-day. This can also help our goals feel a lot more tangible, rather than dealing in big life changes that might hypothetically make us feel more fulfilled and accomplished and get us to a happier state. By focusing on goals that help bring us closer to how we actually want to spend our time, not only will we feel more connected to those goals, but it's also easier to say no to the stuff that isn't going to take us in the direction we want to go. Really just helps us avoid those things that we should want, or we want to be the kind of people who want those things. When it comes to dealing with the threat of unrealistic goals though, this is where I very much like to consider the time frame I have for my goals. I set all of my goals on a 3-month basis, or based on the quarters of the year. And with that, I make sure that when I'm setting the goal, it's realistic for the amount of time I'm giving it. Given that I'm setting goals on a 13-week or 3-month time frame, I don't want to select outcomes that are going to be unrealistic to accomplish in that block of time. One of the reasons I also prefer quarterly goals as opposed to year-long or like super mega long-term goals is it also gives you the opportunity to pivot. Having worked on something for 3 months, if you get to the end of that 3 months and decide, actually, this isn't really for me, I've then wasted less time than I would have trying to slog through that goal for an entire year or multiple years. Plus, I also find that predicting the amount of time I have available across a 3-month period is usually a lot more accurate than thinking about the available time I have across an entire year. And by knowing about my own availability of time, I can be a lot more intentional about which goals I decide to take on. Picking the right goals is only part of successful goal getting though. While setting a goal is good, planning a goal is even better. So if you wanted to know the framework that I use to plan all of my goals, regardless of whether they're short-term, long-term, things that are completely new to me, or stuff that I'm familiar with but want to get better at, then this video is the next one to check out. In that one, I take you over the 5 core elements of good goal planning, so click or tap on that one and I'll see you over there.